continuing in an attempt to find a resolution for the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Yesterday, UN member states sat for an emergency special session of the General Assembly to forge a way forward. I'm joined now by Ashish Pradhan, who is a senior UN analyst at the International Crisis Group, to tell us more. Firstly, of course, we want to know how the meeting yesterday went.
Well, it was a historic meeting. I think only the 11th time the General Assembly has convened in this sort of a special session. And the idea being that efforts are underway to try to isolate Russia beyond the Security Council now at the General Assembly level to pass a resolution on Wednesday to try to condemn it for its aggression and its invasion. And what we saw yesterday was the first step in that. Member states are being asked to step up to the lectern, speak out, condemn Russia's actions through their verbal statements, and then on Wednesday lead up to a vote where the desire is to get as many members as possible to support the General Assembly resolution, the idea being to get at least 100 members or so. And it looks like at the moment diplomats do have those numbers. So the idea, again, being that to make this issue not just be an issue related to Ukraine, but to show that the invasion carried out by Russia is a threat to the international system, the UN Charter, and that other member states beyond just Eastern Europe should be paying attention as well.
Of course, there have been sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, but it seems the President, Vladimir Putin, is really not doing anything. I mean, we saw some satellite images of more forces getting into Ukraine.
Indeed, it looks like they're not necessarily having the immediate effect, and certainly sanctions are something that kick in over time. Now, we've also seen, I think, statements made at the UN yesterday away from the GA at the Security Council. There was another meeting held on Ukraine where the ambassador of Kenya, for example, spoke out about the fact that sanctions could have a detrimental overall impact on the prospects for peace. So there are differing views in terms of how sanctions will come into play. Certainly, the financial sanctions will really hurt the Russian economy in the long run. But in the short run, it doesn't seem like that's changing the calculus on the ground just yet.
Now, we've seen some countries, including Australia, for instance, giving money to Ukraine to be able to get, missiles, etc., and weapons to fight back. Is the UN in support of countries who want to do that for Ukraine?
I think the UN won't necessarily speak out about countries helping Ukrainians arm themselves, but I think where the UN will step in, and I think where the General Assembly will step in, again, with this resolution on Wednesday, will be to try to put extra emphasis and impetus on the humanitarian response. So I think, people around the UN were generally left really disappointed by the Security Council's inaction last week because of Russia's veto. But the focus this week will be, let's at least help the people on the ground. So both at the GA level, but also at the Security Council level, there are a couple of resolutions in play which would help the people suffering on the ground, through maybe the appointment of a senior UN official who can help marshal donor funding, ensure that people live up to their pledges that are made to address the humanitarian situation. But also critically, I think there will be voice given to the fact that, everyone inside Ukraine that's trying to flee Ukraine, whether that's Ukrainian citizens, whether those are migrants, students, including African diaspora that are in Ukraine, who have, been widespread reporting that they haven't been able to move in and out of Ukraine as easily as others, that those people need to be given safe, unhindered, unfettered access to pathways outside of Ukraine. So I think we'll see statements made to that regard. So that's where I think the UN can be helpful and impactful, is marshalling and corralling a global response, to the people suffering on the ground, both Ukrainians and non-Ukrainians.
Where does the UN stand? I mean, this is a war waged on basically the world, actually. It's a humanitarian crisis waiting to happen. If this prolongs further, it means that, it'll trickle down to other countries as well. So where does the UN stand, especially in terms of condemning the Russian government, but also making sure that this cannot continue or it doesn't continue?
That's precisely been, I think, part of the strategy of several key member states around the UN, and certainly the UN Secretary General as well, who's spoken in very clear terms about the fact that, again, this isn't just an issue that's specific to Russia and Ukraine. If Russia and its actions in violating the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a UN member state like Ukraine is allowed to do this without any consequence, others will be motivated to potentially do the same in the future. And so it needs to be seen in that global context, and that, again, if Russia is allowed to do this without any rebuke, any condemnation, it speaks very ill of the international system, because Russia is a member of the P5. And we've heard African member states, I think, have been really helpful in underlining these stakes. The ambassador of Ghana said last week that being a member of the P5 brings with it a special privilege, but also a special responsibility, and that these members should be seen as guardians of the international peace and security system and architecture. Of course, Russia's actions have been completely in contravention of that, and underscoring that seems to be one of the key strategies. And again, I think trying to call this out as much as possible, making it very clear in terms that underscore that this should be seen by member states in Africa and Latin America and Asia as a threat to their own sovereignty and territorial integrity, I think has been a key part of the messaging in and around the UN. I think it's been effective so far.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time and for that update emanating from yesterday's meeting between the states. Now, that was Ashish Pradhan, a senior UN analyst at the International Crisis Group, weighing in on the conflict between Ukraine and Russia.